In Utopia, I observed that where money rules all things, justice can scarcely prevail. Today, as I witness your modern economy, that ancient diagnosis proves prophetic. What passes for legitimate commerce often masks systematic exploitation, a form of theft made legal by those who profit from it. While your society boasts unprecedented wealth creation, it simultaneously generates unprecedented inequality through mechanisms that would make medieval robber barons blush. The tragedy isn't that some grow rich, but that the very structures you've built to create prosperity systematically impoverish others. This isn't about destroying commerce, but about recognizing how current economic arrangements violate the fundamental principle that human dignity must ground all social policy. When we examine your economy through the lens of justice rather than mere efficiency, uncomfortable truths emerge about who truly benefits from our advanced systems. Chapter 1: The Great Deception, When Exploitation Wears a Legal Uniform. The most insidious form of theft isn't the midnight burglar breaking windows, it's the daylight robbery conducted through perfectly legal contracts. In my time, I watched Henry VIII confiscate monastic lands and redistribute them to his favorites, calling it reform. Your age has perfected similar techniques. Consider how modern corporations structure their operations. They externalize costs onto communities while privatizing profits, pay wages insufficient for dignified living while demanding maximum productivity, and lobby for laws that protect their interests while weakening workers' ability to organize for fair treatment. This isn't traditional theft because it operates within legal frameworks, but it violates the deeper moral law that governs human relationships. When Amazon pays no federal taxes while its workers qualify for food stamps, when Walmart's business model depends on taxpayer-subsidized healthcare for its employees, when oil companies receive billions in subsidies while leaving environmental cleanup costs for future generations, these practices reveal a system designed to concentrate wealth upward while socializing risks downward. The genius of this system lies in its apparent legitimacy. Unlike medieval lords who took tribute by force, modern economic elites take their share through complex financial instruments, regulatory capture, and political influence. The peasant knew he was being robbed. Today's worker signs contracts agreeing to their own exploitation, often viewing their situation as natural market outcomes rather than the result of deliberately structured power imbalances. What makes this particularly tragic is how it corrupts our understanding of justice itself. We begin to believe that whatever the market produces must be fair. That vast inequality simply reflects different levels of merit or effort. This ideology transforms victims into volunteers, making them complicit in their own impoverishment while protecting the consciences of those who benefit from unjust arrangements. The solution isn't to eliminate markets, but to recognize that markets are human institutions that must serve human flourishing. When they systematically fail to do so, the problem lies not with abstract economic forces but with the legal and cultural frameworks that shape how markets operate. True economic reform requires moral courage to call theft by its proper name, regardless of its legal status. Chapter 2: The Wage Trap: How Fair Exchange Became Systematic Exploitation. In Utopia, I wrote that people shouldn't work more than 6 hours daily because longer labor serves only to enrich masters while impoverishing workers' souls and bodies. Your modern economy has inverted this wisdom, creating what I can only call a sophisticated form of bondage disguised as freedom. The contemporary wage system, particularly in its current American form, represents a kind of legalized theft that would shock even the most ruthless medieval merchant. Consider the fundamental dishonesty in how wages are set. Employers claim they pay market rates, as if these rates emerged from natural laws rather than systematic suppression of workers' bargaining power. Through decades of anti-union legislation, union-busting tactics, and the threat of moving production overseas, employers have artificially depressed wages while dramatically increasing productivity expectations. The result is that workers produce far more value than they receive in compensation, with the surplus flowing upward to executives and shareholders. This arrangement becomes particularly perverse when we examine how essential workers are treated. During your recent pandemic, society discovered which jobs were truly necessary: healthcare workers, grocery clerks, delivery drivers, sanitation workers, yet these same workers often can't afford housing in the communities they serve. Meanwhile, entire industries that produce little of genuine value, high-frequency trading, luxury marketing, certain forms of financial speculation, generate enormous wealth for participants. The wage trap operates through several mechanisms. First, by keeping minimum wages below living wages, forcing workers to accept any employment regardless of conditions. Second, by eliminating benefits that once made jobs sustainable, pensions, healthcare, job security, while demanding greater flexibility and commitment from workers. Third, by creating artificial scarcity of good jobs through monopolization and financialization of the economy. Perhaps most insidiously, this system forces workers to compete against each other rather than cooperate for mutual benefit. When desperate people bid against each other for insufficient employment, wages inevitably fall to subsistence levels while working conditions deteriorate. This isn't free market competition, it's manufactured desperation used to extract maximum value from human labor. The solution requires recognizing that wages aren't just prices in a market, but the foundation of human dignity in society. When work doesn't provide enough for a family to live decently, when full-time employment still requires government assistance, when productivity gains flow entirely to capital while labor stagnates, these are symptoms of a morally corrupted economic system that treats human beings as disposable inputs rather than the ultimate purpose of all economic activity. Chapter 3: The Housing Racket: Shelter as a Speculative Commodity. Nothing reveals the moral bankruptcy of your economic system more clearly than how it treats housing, the most basic human need after food and water. In Utopia, I envisioned communities where everyone had secure, dignified shelter because housing served human needs rather than investment portfolios. Your modern approach represents the opposite. Basic shelter has become a speculative commodity, creating artificial scarcity to generate profits while leaving millions without stable homes. The mechanics of this theft operate through several interrelated systems. Real estate investment trusts and private equity firms purchase single-family homes en masse, converting homeownership opportunities into rental income streams. These same entities often let properties sit vacant rather than lower prices, maintaining artificial scarcity to maximize returns. Meanwhile, local zoning laws, often influenced by existing property owners who benefit from scarcity, prevent construction of affordable housing, further restricting supply. The result is a system where housing costs consume disproportionate shares of family income, forcing people to choose between decent shelter and other necessities like healthcare, education, or savings. Young families find themselves permanently excluded from homeownership, not due to personal failings but because speculation has inflated prices beyond what productive work can reasonably afford. This represents a fundamental transfer of wealth from those who need homes to those who already own multiple properties. What makes this particularly cruel is how it traps families in cycles of poverty. Without homeownership, families can't build equity or pass wealth to their children. Instead, they pay rent that often exceeds what mortgage payments would cost, but without gaining any ownership stake. Meanwhile, landlords, who often borrowed money to purchase these properties, used tenants' rent payments to pay off mortgages, essentially forcing renters to buy houses for other people. The banking system amplifies this injustice through discriminatory lending practices, credit score requirements that exclude people recovering from economic hardship, and interest rates that can double the cost of homes over time. These mechanisms ensure that housing remains accessible primarily to those who already have wealth, while working families face perpetual exclusion from stable homeownership. This isn't a natural market outcome but the result of deliberate policy choices that prioritize investment returns over human shelter needs. Countries with different approaches, such as Singapore's public housing system or Vienna's social housing model, prove that societies can provide quality housing for all residents without sacrificing economic prosperity. The American approach represents a choice to treat shelter as a commodity rather than a human right, generating enormous profits for some while creating homelessness and housing insecurity for millions. Chapter 4: Financial Alchemy: How Banks Create Money from Nothing and Charge Interest. Perhaps no aspect of your modern economy would seem more bizarre to a 16th century observer than how your banking system operates. In my time, usury, charging interest on loans, was considered sinful because it created money from nothing while adding no real value to society. Your contemporary banking system has elevated this practice to an art form, creating what can only be described as legalized counterfeiting on a massive scale. The fundamental deception lies in how banks actually create money. Most people believe banks lend out deposits from savers, but the reality is far more troubling. When banks make loans, they create new money electronically, literally typing numbers into computer systems. This newly created money enters circulation bearing interest obligations, meaning the total amount owed always exceeds the amount created. The mathematical impossibility of paying interest on money that never existed forces society into perpetual debt expansion and economic growth dependency. This system creates several forms of systematic theft. First, it gives banks the extraordinary privilege of creating the medium of exchange that everyone else must earn through productive labor. Second, it ensures that interest payments constantly transfer wealth from borrowers to lenders, regardless of the social value created by either party. Third, it makes the money supply dependent on debt creation, forcing communities to go into debt to have adequate currency for commerce. The consequences ripple through every aspect of economic life. Families must borrow money that banks create from nothing, then spend years or decades of actual labor to repay these fictional debts with real work. Governments must pay interest to private banks for the privilege of creating their own currency, transferring taxpayer wealth to financial institutions that provide no corresponding public benefit. Small businesses struggle to access credit while large corporations receive favorable rates, concentrating economic power among entities that can best navigate complex financial systems. Perhaps most perniciously, this system creates artificial scarcity of money itself. Because banks only create the principal but not the interest on loans, there's never enough money in circulation to pay all debts simultaneously. This structural shortage forces competition for inadequate currency, driving down wages and prices while maintaining banks' privileged position as money creators. The solution doesn't require eliminating banking but reforming it to serve public rather than private interests. Public banking systems, such as the Bank of North Dakota, demonstrate how communities can create credit for productive purposes without transferring wealth to distant shareholders. Monetary reform proposals, from full reserve banking to sovereign money creation, offer pathways toward financial systems that serve human flourishing rather than financial extraction. Chapter 5: Corporate Feudalism: When Companies Become More Powerful Than Governments. In Utopia, I described a society where private accumulation couldn't undermine public welfare because institutions prevented wealth concentration from corrupting governance. Your modern corporate system represents the opposite achievement. Private entities have accumulated power that rivals or exceeds democratic governance, creating a new form of feudalism disguised as free enterprise. The comparison to feudalism isn't metaphorical but structural. Medieval lords controlled land and extracted tribute from those who worked it. Modern corporations control capital and extract value from those who operate it. Like feudal lords, corporate executives exercise quasi-governmental power over their subjects, determining working conditions, benefits, even which communities prosper or decline. And like medieval nobility, they've created legal structures that protect their privileges while limiting accountability to those affected by their decisions. This corporate feudalism operates through several mechanisms that constitute forms of legalized theft. First, corporations externalize costs while privatizing benefits, polluting environments that communities must clean up, using infrastructure that taxpayers built, paying wages so low that government programs must supplement basic needs. Second, they use regulatory capture to write laws that benefit themselves at public expense, turning democratic processes into vehicles for corporate welfare. Third, they employ sophisticated tax avoidance strategies that shift their obligations onto individual taxpayers and small businesses. The scale of this wealth transfer defies comprehension. Amazon, despite generating hundreds of billions in revenue, often pays no federal taxes while relying on public roads, educated workers, legal systems, and internet infrastructure that taxpayers fund. Apple holds hundreds of billions offshore to avoid taxation while benefiting from research and development that government programs supported. Pharmaceutical companies charge thousands for drugs developed with public funding, then claim patent protections to prevent generic competition. Perhaps most troubling is how corporations have acquired rights that were designed for human beings while avoiding corresponding responsibilities. Corporate personhood allows these entities to spend unlimited amounts on political campaigns, claim religious freedom exemptions, and invoke free speech protections, while their limited liability structures protect owners from bearing full responsibility for corporate actions. This system creates a fundamental imbalance where corporate interests consistently override community welfare. When companies can threaten to relocate unless they receive tax breaks, environmental exemptions, or regulatory relief, they effectively hold communities hostage. The result is a race to the bottom where public services decline, environmental protections weaken, and worker rights erode as governments compete to attract or retain corporate investment. The solution requires rebalancing power between democratic governance and corporate authority. This means ending corporate welfare, closing tax loopholes, strengthening regulatory enforcement, and restructuring corporate law to prioritize stakeholder rather than shareholder interests. Most fundamentally, it requires recognizing that corporations are human creations that must serve human purposes, not autonomous entities with rights that supersede community welfare. Chapter 6: The Innovation Myth: How Progress Became Profit Extraction. Your modern economy justifies vast inequality through what I call the innovation myth, the belief that extreme wealth concentration represents fair compensation for beneficial innovations. This narrative suggests that billionaires earn their fortunes by creating value for society, making their extreme wealth not just acceptable but praiseworthy. However, examining how innovation actually occurs reveals this story as largely fictional, masking systematic appropriation of collective human knowledge for private gain. Consider how most breakthrough technologies develop. The internet emerged from government-funded research projects. GPS technology came from military investments. Touchscreen interfaces, voice recognition, and lithium-ion batteries all resulted from public research initiatives. Yet when private companies combine these publicly developed technologies into consumer products, they claim full ownership of the resulting innovations and profits. This represents a massive transfer of wealth from the public domain to private hands. The pharmaceutical industry exemplifies this pattern most clearly. Drug companies routinely take compounds developed through taxpayer-funded university research, conduct clinical trials often subsidized by government programs, then charge whatever prices the market will bear while claiming patent protections that prevent competition. When these companies generate enormous profits from publicly funded discoveries, they effectively steal from the commons while claiming credit for innovation they didn't create. Even in cases where private entities contribute genuine innovation, The current system dramatically overstates individual contributions while ignoring social foundations. Every innovation builds on centuries of accumulated human knowledge, language, mathematics, scientific methods, cultural traditions, legal systems, educational institutions. No individual creates value in isolation, yet our economic system allows individuals to claim exclusive ownership of innovations that depend entirely on social inheritance. The tech industry has perfected this appropriation through platform monopolies that extract value from user activity. Social media companies provide communication infrastructure while harvesting personal data to sell to advertisers. Search engines organize publicly available information while collecting behavioral data for commercial purposes. These platforms become valuable precisely because many people use them, yet users receive no compensation for creating the network effects that generate billions in profits. This system also distorts innovation incentives away from genuine human benefit toward profit maximization. Companies develop planned obsolescence to force frequent replacements. Pharmaceutical research focuses on profitable conditions rather than global health needs. Social media platforms optimize for addiction rather than well-being. Financial services create complex instruments that generate fees rather than improve economic efficiency. The solution requires recognizing innovation as inherently collaborative and ensuring that benefits flow back to the communities that make innovation possible. This could include public ownership stakes in companies that commercialize publicly funded research, stronger antitrust enforcement to prevent platform monopolies, and innovation policies that prioritize social benefit over private profit. Most fundamentally, we need innovation systems that serve human flourishing rather than wealth concentration. Chapter 7: Reclaiming Economics: Building Systems that Serve Human Dignity. After cataloging these various forms of legalized theft, one might despair that economic justice is impossible within market systems. But this conclusion would mistake current arrangements for eternal laws. Markets are human institutions that can be reformed to serve human dignity rather than undermine it. The challenge isn't eliminating commerce but restructuring it to align with moral principles that recognize every person's inherent worth. True economic reform must begin with fundamental questions about purpose. Should economic systems serve to maximize individual wealth accumulation, or should they ensure that everyone can live with dignity? Should markets be ends in themselves, or means toward human flourishing? Your current system assumes the former. Justice requires embracing the latter. This reorientation demands concrete institutional changes. Worker cooperatives can replace corporate hierarchies, giving employees ownership stakes and democratic control over their labor conditions. Public banking can redirect credit creation toward community development rather than financial speculation. Universal basic services can ensure everyone has access to healthcare, education, transportation, and housing regardless of market outcomes. Taxation must also reflect moral priorities rather than political power. Land value capture can prevent speculation from inflating housing costs. Financial transaction taxes can reduce destabilizing speculation while funding public investments. Progressive taxation on wealth, not just income, can prevent extreme accumulation from corrupting democratic governance. Perhaps most importantly, we need cultural changes that measure success by community well-being rather than individual accumulation. This means celebrating teachers, healthcare workers, and environmental stewards rather than financiers and speculators. It means designing cities for human interaction rather than automobile convenience. It means recognizing care work, artistic creation, and civic engagement as valuable contributions to social wealth. These reforms aren't utopian fantasies but practical policies already implemented in various forms around the world. Countries with stronger social safety nets, more cooperative business structures, and more progressive taxation consistently achieve better outcomes on measures of human development, environmental sustainability, and social cohesion. The transition requires political courage to challenge entrenched interests, but it also requires moral clarity about what kind of society we want to build. When we recognize that current economic arrangements systematically violate human dignity, continuing to defend them becomes complicity in injustice. The choice isn't between perfect systems and imperfect ones, but between systems that serve human flourishing and systems that serve wealth concentration. Conclusion. The economy I've described, one that prioritizes human dignity over profit maximization, isn't just morally superior but practically superior. Societies that ensure everyone can contribute their talents, that invest in education and infrastructure, that protect environments for future generations, consistently outperform societies organized around extraction and accumulation. The current system's apparent success masks profound failures that are becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. When we call contemporary economic arrangements what they truly are, various forms of legalized theft, we open space for authentic alternatives that serve human flourishing rather than financial abstraction. The choice before your generation is whether to continue defending systems that concentrate wealth while impoverishing human potential, or to embrace the demanding but rewarding work of building economies worthy of human dignity. Justice doesn't require perfection, but it does require honesty about current failures and courage to pursue available alternatives.